Hey, She Ace That listeners, find us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Every subscribe, like, and follow goes a long way, and I can't thank you all enough for your support. And with that, let's get into today's episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to She Is That. It's your host Alexandra. To kick off this week's episode, I of course have to show you guys this week's addition to the She Is That collection wall. If you're new here throughout the season, just have been sending me items that mean something to them or represents them, and I'm going to be putting them up on the wall behind me. And it's become one of my favorite parts of this whole thing is just being able to represent and hold on to something that's really meaningful to the guests that we are able to have on this platform. So this week's item is incredible, and it's really up there for one of my top items I've received. So far, I've gotten coaching polos, signed volleyballs, and t-shirts. And this week's item is from one of my good friends, Alyssa Kerrigan, who was on the podcast back in season 1. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it there, but you'll also be able to see this on socials. She painted me a canvas where we're blocking together, and it's a picture that we had from high school, and which is so incredible. We remember this play vividly, and it's one of my absolute favorite things I own now. And Alyssa and I go way back. We met freshman year of high school. We played volleyball together. We lived together in college, and she's still one of my best friends to this day. And her episode was all about navigating setbacks and comebacks. She made JV as a junior when she fully expected to make varsity, went through the struggles of that, and instead of quitting, she showed up every single day, became a captain, led that team, got so much playing time and exposure to develop further, and then came back senior year as a starter on varsity and earned all conference honorable mention. And her whole message was, if you love a sport enough, you keep going and you don't let one moment or decision or the team that you end up on define you. And I think about that a lot. And honestly, her story is something I always tell girls when they DM me about should they take a spot on JV as a junior. And I explain her situation and what she got out of it. Obviously, every situation's different. Every team dynamic, program dynamic is completely different. So we normally focus on the negative or what we expected to happen for ourselves that season. And she was able to push through something that wasn't easy at the time, and it still paid off for her long term. And I've seen the flip side of that, where I've seen girls quit because of receiving a spot on JV as a junior and ending their sport that they love completely. I think each person has their different validations and reasons for it, but it's always something to take into consideration and try to hear other people's perspectives on if you should or shouldn't stop the sport that you love, and depending on the reasons. So when I look at that painting of us blocking together, it just reminds me of everything we went through and how the JV journey sometimes makes the best varsity stories. And if you haven't listened to that episode, definitely go back and find it. It's a good one. We talk about the yips, we talk about playing time, we talk about team dynamics, and I'm just forever grateful that she shared her story on She Aced That and that it helped a lot of you during that time. I received so many DMs on the JV and varsity standpoint decision-making process. And it was just one of those topics that a lot of athletes go through at that level. So I want to go into some of the DMs that I've been receiving lately. There's been a trend in them. I did get a DM recently from a girl. I'm going to pull it up. And she said the hardest part of tournaments isn't the games, it's the downtime, because that's when she's realizing she doesn't really have one person on her team that she's super close connected to and can hang out during that off time. And that was a unique DM actually that I've gotten recently, especially as club season's been starting. I didn't really have a perfect response for that. Obviously, when I give advice about starting a new team or joining a new program, to always try to find that person that you can cheer with, that you can sit on the bench with, that you can kind of laugh off some of those silly mistakes that might feel a lot bigger than they really are. And her DM to me about that dynamic just stuck with me because I think more people feel that way, especially depending on high school or club dynamics, than we realize. And it made me think about team culture and what it actually takes to be on a team where you feel like you belong fully, not just on the court, but off of it too, right? Like the bus rides, hotel rooms, the time between matches. And that stuff does matter more than people think. Off the court stuff and on the court stuff tie into each other directly. I've been on teams where I felt like I was totally a part of something. I felt like I could go up to any girl and talk to them and be friends with them. We had amazing team chemistry, both on and off the court. And I've also been on the flip side where I showed up, did my job, and honestly left and didn't really think about that team off the court because it just was the dynamic that year. The difference in how you play, how you feel about yourself, how much you actually enjoy the sport, it's huge. It's huge. It's impactful. It's directly impactful to your happiness, to your commitment. And I think it's on everyone, right? Like it's not just on the one girl that feels left out. It's not just on the girls that don't feel left out. It's the whole dynamic of the team that's important here. And again, does impact your success on the court together. Coaches obviously are supposed to set the tone, but the players really are the ones that create the culture too. Are you the teammate who notices when someone's sitting alone? And that is small stuff, but it really does add up. I look back and I felt like I was pretty open and, again, friends with a lot of the girls on all of my teams and felt like I was that open space. But when I really look back to that time in my life, I'm like, I probably could have gone up to a few more girls. I probably could have made a few more feel more included. And I think we all can in different ways. Like our intentions aren't always to exclude others, but there is that line where you really do need to be cognizant of how you are impacting your teammates and maybe how your teammates are impacting you that you just didn't realize. I've also been thinking about how much pressure there is on athletes right now. I've received some DMs about that in general of like, how can I enjoy sport when all I feel is intense pressure around me in various ways? And part of that has been the cost of everything. Club sports are expensive, like really expensive. The travel, the commitment, that adds a layer that we really don't talk about too much. Like we just are like, oh, you're playing club. That's great. We're not really thinking of the stress that comes about playing club sports. And when your family is spending thousands of dollars for you to play, there's this unspoken pressure that to get a potential scholarship, maybe to make the top team at that club that you're trying out for, to perform. You're paying money to play on the court and perform. And when things aren't going well, like you're not getting playing time, even though you're spending thousands of dollars, or you're struggling in various ways, it feels heavier because you're thinking about everything that went into getting you there. I've gotten messages from girls who feel guilty for not loving their sport anymore. And that's not because like anything bad happened, honestly. A lot of them were like nothing tangible happened where I don't want to show up. But I do know how much my parents sacrificed for this. And I don't feel like I can even bring up that I might not be as happy as they truly think I am. And that is a lot to carry around. And looking back, I felt fortunate enough to be able to play club, but there's so many athletes out there that aren't able to take on that additional cost, and it isn't always up to them. My one advice, though, is there is fundraising opportunities. A lot of clubs can offer some financial support to a point, and that is honestly my long-term goal, as she said. I would love to help athletes with pay to play. I would love to help athletes who can't get the resources that they deserve. Even when it comes to mental performance coaching, right? That's another expense that a lot of athletes do invest in nowadays. And it's not always realistic, but those are the things that can set you apart. Starting club earlier, the mental performance coaching, private lessons, those all add up. And I don't have a fix for it at the moment. It is a bigger issue, but I think acknowledging it matters because it does affect the mental side of sports, whether we admit it or not. What's also a little bit difficult is monetizing on sports becoming an issue. Bigger clubs are starting to take over more. That's a wonderful thing that more people are investing in these sports, but it also brings another side to the equation that maybe we'll do a completely other episode on and kind of dive deeper into the background dynamics of being able to play club sports and having that privilege. Another thing I've received some DMs on is obviously recruiting, but more importantly, stats. So tracking stats, especially in high school. Club's important too. So when I was in high school, a lot of whoever was on the bench was taking stats. Some people would try to tag team and help out. Others would try to do it and then they would lose track of what stat to keep next. And a lot wasn't accounted for, honestly. And maybe the coach had a stat sheet going, but like a lot of my teammates weren't really fully paying attention to each other's numbers. And looking back, I think that was a huge missed opportunity for my entire team in high school. Like we tried it and it wasn't really working that great. And all of our stats, when I even go back now, so this is like over 10 years ago, I graduated from high school. I can still pull up my stats to this day. And I was like pretty impressed with where I was. But at the same time, I knew a lot was missing. And looking back, that was a huge part of even a potential conversation about recruiting. It all goes back to your stats and your videos. And just something I want to highlight now is if you are actively managing statistics for your team, realize the impact that has. And obviously it has to be honest and truthful, but if you're missing stuff, it's really important to highlight that because that does impact yourself and your teammates. And another note is when you track stats, and not just yours, like even your teammates too, you are able to start looking at the game differently. Your volleyball IQ increases. You start to notice patterns. You can have real conversations about what's working instead of the stats will bring a different perspective and normally do. And same with video. Those things are great to invest in because they better you long term. It builds connection too with you and your teammates. When you're paying attention to someone else's game and their stats, you are invested in them just as much. It's, again, a smaller thing, but I think it helps a lot with team chemistry. And definitely something I would do a little bit differently if I could go back knowing what I know now, especially from a recruiting standpoint. So anyway, all of these topics tie into today's conversation. Today's guest really gets into the mental side of sports and what's actually going on in your head when you're dealing with confidence and pressure. Alison Gorrell is a mental performance coach. She played D1 basketball, went pro overseas for 7 years, got her master's in sports and exercise psychology while she was still playing professionally, and now works with athletes from the youth to Olympic levels. You can take everything off the court. And one thing she said is, you're too valuable to be stuck in the past. And I feel like everybody needs to hear that. Like, it's so easy to get caught up on previous situations or previous things that have happened in our lives. And really all we have is the present moment, not the future, not the past. The time is now. I'm working on that myself. I'm really excited for you guys to hear this one, and let's get into it. Here's my conversation with mental performance coach Alison Gorrell. Alison, welcome to She Aced That.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I was really excited to reach out to Coach Gorrell. She is a mental performance coach, and it's something that we just need to continue talking about in the sports world. So before we dive into your work specifically, can you just tell us a little bit more about you and what led you to this space?
Yeah, so my background is as a basketball player. I played all types of sports growing up, but really honed in on basketball. Played Division 1. The first place I went to was really just tough mentally. It was not a good fit for me, but at that time, sports psychology was not a thing. It was not spoken about at all. So I had no resources or anything like that. I ended up transferring, and it was a much better fit for me. From there, I ended up going professionally overseas, and I was able to see such a stark contrast between when I was in a good mental place and what my performance was like and when I was not in a good place. And one of my opportunities was to get my master's overseas in the UK while I was playing with a pro team. And at the time, I didn't even really know what sports psychology, what that was going to be. Like in America, there was only 3 programs at the time available in sports psychology, but it was more normal in Europe and the UK. And so at the time, I was like, well, if I end up being a coach, this would be kind of interesting to know about. And so I wasn't going into it thinking this is what I would do, but I ended up doing my education in it, which ended up leading me to working in it. But I think it was always because I had that experience, but also I've always just believed that the mental side of sports is such a key aspect of performance that people just didn't talk about enough.
I totally agree. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel the same. That's why I wanted to start She Aced That. I'm really excited for all that you have to share today. You played professional basketball. So can you take me back to that? And what were the specific mental battles that you experienced as an athlete at that time?
Yeah, well, it's such a big transition from the college world. It's one thing if you're in the States and playing, kind of in a country that you're really familiar with. It's another thing when you're moving into a different country, sometimes in countries where you just speak different languages and all of that. And so there's a big isolation factor. There's a lot of pressure because you can get cut at any time. They can cut your contract, send you home. It's very different having it as your job and balancing the intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic. So like the motivation of just the joy of playing and my desire to play versus, oh, I'm playing for money now. And like I'm playing for my livelihood. So keeping that joy alive was a big piece of it, a big challenge, because it very easily felt like a job because you have so many practices, so many obligations. And then just keeping confidence high because you have now a lot of expectations on your shoulders of what your role is expected to be and how you need to perform. And it's no longer really just for fun. There are consequences if you're not playing well. So a lot of those things were a huge transition, and just being away from friends and family. It's not like college where you just have all your people around you. It's very different when you're off on your own.
Do you have any advice to athletes maybe going through a similar time where, they are dealing with contracts, they are dealing with having to perform and feeling those incentives, how to maintain that internal confidence versus just focusing on, external validation when it comes to an actual job in the sports world?
Definitely. I think that the main one that probably a lot of people have heard already is really remember your why. Like
Mhm.
it's so easy to, especially nowadays with NIL and college, to make it so much more about the money and the attention and the likes on social media. And you get so far away from what it's all about. Like you're playing your sport because you love it. You get to run around with your friends and you get to do this thing that's ultimately a game you care a lot about, but it still is a game. So reminding yourself like why you actually love doing this thing and trying to shift away from this is so serious and this is such a job to like this is actually pretty cool and really fun. So I think that's very important. And then focusing really on the controllables and not just the result. Everybody else will focus on the result, but we can't control the result. We can only control how we approach it and the things that opportunities we give ourselves, the things that we do on the court. Like, are we taking shots? Are we being aggressive? Are we keeping good communication, effort, attitude? And if you can really feel good about the way you're approaching every single game, the results are going to go up and down, but you can at least be proud of the consistency of the way that you approach things. As any athlete knows, you will never get great results all the time. But if you can at least be like, well, I know that I showed up the way I wanted to and I gave myself opportunities. Some days they'll fall and some days they won't, but you can at least stay consistent with your approach.
Like the perfectionism aspect in sports, we as athletes always expect the highest level of our performance, but at the same time, sports are sports because they allow mistakes and you learn from mistakes. There's so many distractions nowadays with social media and comparison. There's always been that in sports to an extent, but now more than ever, it's really critical to kind of tune out the outside noise and what other people are saying. It's so easy for people to hide behind a screen or think that social media is the reality when it really is a highlight reel. Do you ever give like advice to your athletes on how to navigate, that social media side of it and how to kind of ignore that noise, especially at, professional levels?
For sure. I mean, the most basic thing is boundaries. First of all, it's like so
Mhm.
easy to go down a rabbit hole of looking at everything. And it just has so many influences on our brain that we cannot
Yeah.
control. And as much as you try to kind of fix your mindset around it, if you're being exposed to it, it's going to have an influence. So the first thing is give yourself boundaries around it. Don't let yourself doom scroll or go down these rabbit holes that are ultimately just really going to kill your confidence because most of it's a facade. I mean, there are these great things happening, but I talk to athletes all around the world at every single level, and everybody's going through the same thing. Everyone is struggling with confidence and pressure. And it doesn't matter if you're one of the best of the best, it's not all perfect. It's not all glamorous like social
Mm.
media shows it to be. And so I think just setting boundaries, staying away from it a little bit. And also I think one of the biggest problems is people think it's not normal to fail anymore because everything's so perfect. And so I think reminding people that failure is part of the equation for success and no one's going to post all their failures, but even the best of the best had to fail a lot to get there. And even when they are at the highest level, they're still failing all the time. So just trying to normalize the failure a little bit more.
Our failures aren't magnified, right? Like 99% of the time, it's just us that are aware of it. And, I have talked to, fortunately, a lot of professional athletes, and their stories and journeys are so interesting to me because their struggles from the outside, you would never think they're struggling with, is their day to day reality of things that they've had to work through, either with mental performance coaches or on their own or just with support. Especially in various sports, we always want to know our role and responsibility, but sometimes that changes and it's both a physical and mental impact when that happens. It's benefiting our mental health when we take a step back from it in general and focus on reality. Sure, 30 years ago, we didn't feel magnified on social media, and now there is that parameter to take into consideration. But I will say sometimes I'm scrolling on social media and I see a lot of athletes speaking negatively about their high school coaches, no matter the sport. Obviously, I see a lot of volleyball, but basketball, soccer, tennis, whatever it is, and they're all able to feed off each other in a negative manner from different programs, different areas. And I just think that adds the opposite direction of fuel to a fire that really could be minimized if they were able to handle that in person versus feeding into it behind a screen. That's been something I struggle seeing. I lucked out with great coaches. I lucked out with great teammates. Obviously, there were struggles along the way, but it makes me sad to see the negative aspects of it now. And maybe some of it's entitlement, some of it is bad coaching, but it's so much easier to just dish it all out there when you're sitting in your bed versus actually going up to your coach or going up to an expert to ask for help.
Definitely. I so agree with that, especially because going back to that piece of people don't think failure is normal anymore. And
Yeah.
so if things are a little hard or the coach has maybe even they make a wrong decision sometimes, that's normal. Like it's normal to have
Mhm.
that adversity. But when we're in this world where everything should be, quote, be perfect, it's so
Yeah.
easy to criticize.
I fully agree. Your mom is a psychologist and your dad is a philosopher. How did growing up with parents with those backgrounds shape how you think about mental performance and the mind in general?
It was probably my biggest influence. My dad was my
Yeah.
coach for many years,
Wow.
which was unbelievable. It was the best experience, and I know that for a lot of people, that is a really a big challenge to have
Mhm.
their parent as a coach, but they were both so aware and so just gave me so much freedom to explore things myself. They never pushed me. They never were like, you have to do this or do that, or you have to play in college or anything like that. They just kind of wanted to be a part of it. And they truly, especially my mom, is just like such a cheerleader and everything was like, great effort, honey. Like everything was just so positive. And I think that really shaped the way I spoke to myself after games and how my inner voice was. My dad was very level headed. He would never scream at us or anything like that. It was, there was times when he was stern and you would listen, but it was very collaborative. It was very strategy driven and wasn't like these big emotional roller coasters. So I would say that also shaped me as well as of course, you're going to be very emotional in sports. It's an emotional thing, but I would turn more to problem solving and strategizing to solve problems rather than getting sucked into the emotions of it. And they're just very wise in the sense of being able to find perspective in difficult moments. I think the best thing my dad would ever say to me is after a bad game, he'd be like, oh, it's a fluke. Like, that's not even like, it's no big deal. Let's just throw it out onto the next. And he truly made me believe that when I played bad, that wasn't the norm versus parents who are like, what are you doing? Why is this like,
Mhm.
why are you playing like that? It makes them feel like that's part of who they are and that's normal for them. So I think that, and then just being able to find perspective at times where we were, my whole family is very, very sports driven family, but being able to just go do other things and talk about other things and not let it be the only dinner time conversation or the only thing that we would do to bond. We would have so many other activities. And while basketball was by far the number one thing, we were able to unplug from that. And I was able to really shape myself as a more well rounded person and not connect my identity so closely to it.
That's a great point. And parents have such an impact on us and what our internal self talk looks like more than some realize. I have a 20-month-old and I already think about him playing sports down the road and kind of what I expect of myself from already having like a coaching and player background, but also dealing with parents from that side of it. I felt lucky with my parents too, where I always had the positive aspect and other things outside of sports to continue driving me and keep me stable. But we are raising young adults. We want them to be successful in life. We don't want them to just be an athlete their whole life. That comes with being a successful adult and finding your passions and doing what you love, but it doesn't fully define you. Having that foundation is so critical for our success in the moment, but long term as well. Did you ever experience any negative feedback on your parent being the coach? Was there ever favoritism conversations?
It definitely was something. It was tough for sure. I came from a like pretty small mountain town where I was the only person that was going to play Division 1 sports for my school. It wasn't like a normal thing in my area. And so I took it way more seriously than everybody. We had a good team despite that, but um, a lot of people absolutely loved my dad as a coach, but there was always a little bit of that aspect of she's just doing this because her dad's the coach or something like that. And I remember at the time it was pretty hard. I definitely internalized it a lot and was pretty upset about it. But I think, again, like my dad helped me kind of think through it and stay level headed about it and kind of remind myself like what I'm doing and kind of understand why maybe people are saying this. But it was definitely challenging because I think with working with kids this age, like back in high school and stuff, there is a lot of kind of the comparison of what path somebody else is on and where they're going. And that's just so prevalent in that high school and college age.
I've seen that on a few different fronts. It's funny because my grandpa would always coach my mom growing up with softball, basketball, whatever they were playing. I've actually coached alongside somebody whose daughter was on our team. I've also been a part of other environments like that. And I've kind of seen it from all sides of potential favoritism, right? And I think for the most part, when coaches want to help athletes, they're doing it out of drive and passion and want to be mentors. So I think most of the time that isn't the case, but I feel like other parents or players will easily leverage that scenario. Teammates can handle it one way or the other, and I've seen it from both a positive and negative standpoint.
I was just going to say that I think one thing that was really that I took away from the way that my dad approached that situation is he did a great job of making everybody on the team feel valued and important. And I've just seen that as I was going into like college and pro and stuff, the teams that were most successful, regardless if people were playing 2 minutes or 40 minutes, if everybody felt like they were important and valued and they were seen and understood, there is so much better camaraderie and so much better team connection. And I think that's something that has always been really important to me because I've seen how divisive it can be when people don't feel seen. And so I think no matter what, even the last person on the bench, they are an important aspect of the team and they still need to be valued. And I think that's something players and coaches can be aware of to mitigate some of these dynamics.
It should be talked about, right? If you are the last player that's probably not going to see the court very much, but you're still fulfilling a role in your team, that should be honored and able to be discussed. A lot of the times when athletes are in those situations or bench, maybe they'll go up to their coach one time, but they're not trying to actively have that continuous conversation. Instead, they'll just have negative self-talk or go talk negative to their parents when they leave practice. It's something that if you want to be a part of a team, sometimes we have, depending on the year, depending on your situation, we have different roles that we can fulfill. And if you are a bench player most of the time, you're still the one that's making the athletes on the court work harder, right, to keep their spots. You're pushing them to excel as well. It's so fun to always be on the court and to be playing, but once you can get through that little hump of accepting your role, it makes or breaks your whole team dynamic. And you got your master's in sport and exercise psychology while you were in the UK, and that was while you were still playing professionally. So can you share how you balanced both and what drove you to doing that at that same time?
So I went straight from college into that situation. I had
Yeah.
some different options, whether I wanted to just play fully professional or was this option to play professional and for them to um, pay for me to get a master's. And at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was like, well, more school, like free school kind of thing. Like, why would I not take advantage of that opportunity? So I didn't really have a clear path forward, but best decision I could have made. I think the balance between the two is very different than college in America because they were completely separated. There's a school structure was different. There was a lot less like tests and like small little assignments. It was one huge project for the year and like that's your grade, make or break it kind of thing. So it was easier to manage because a lot of it was like self-study or you were doing assignments throughout the year that was building to some things in the end. So it was like up to you for your own time management. But I think that was a skill that I really was able to build through college. the travel and all of that, it's not the same as America. Like, you're in the bus for hours and hours to these
Yeah.
games, like, sometimes these, like, 8 or 10-hour bus rides, and, that was kinda challenging because you're going from kind of these, like, bougie plane rides in America and, like, everything's super nice, and so I think that was just, like, a shift and challenging, but in the end, I didn't find the balance of the 2 that much more difficult. The balance that ended up being difficult down the road, which I'm sure we'll get to, is when I started working and I was playing still while I was working, and that ended up being more challenging because of the different time zones I was working in and stuff, but the school part of it was kind of like just an extension of what college was like.
I give you a lot of credit. It's an adjustment in itself to be in a different place than you're used to, different dynamics. So I do want to get into what you did for work starting at that same time.
Yeah, I got very lucky, to be honest. I was still finishing up my master's, and in the UK, because it's such a smaller country, you connect with a lot more people in the sports world. And so the strength and conditioning coach that I worked with, he also worked with a lot of other athletes, or he worked with our team. And then he also worked with a lot of other athletes. And he was working with the Scotland National Beach Volleyball team. And he was talking with the team and saying like that would be beneficial, and he came to me and was like, is this something you might be interested in? And at the time I hadn't even graduated yet, so I basically had to explain like, I would love to do this, but you have to understand that like this is where I'm at in the process, and so on and so forth. And I ended up meeting with each of the players, each of the coaches, talking through things to see if they thought it would be beneficial or a good fit. And they did. And so I got paired up with them, and that was all on a volunteer basis, but they went on a world tour. So they were playing in all different countries in Europe. I went to as many as I could, and then they ended up qualifying to the Commonwealth Games, and they were in Australia. And the really fortunate thing at the time was my pro coach was the coach of the Great Britain national team for basketball. So he was going as well to Australia. So he allowed me to miss a couple of games to go with the Scotland beach volleyball team. So that was so fortunate. And so I went to Australia for a little, like a month or so
Mhm.
during that, and got to be there. And the team did awesome. And it was really amazing to see the influence sports psychology could have and
Mhm.
see it play out in person and just be a part of something so big in such a different way. And that was when I started to realize maybe this is what I would want to do actually. And so then I still had another year in the UK to do more training around sports psychology and all of that. And then through that strength and conditioning coach, I got connected with a different strength and conditioning coach, which was connected with a pro soccer team, or for them, a football team. And so then I got to work with them for a season, doing team sessions, work with individuals. And so right from the bat, I got to work with super high level athletes, and it just kind of fell in my lap. And it was all through just the connections I made and getting out into the community and stuff, and loved both of those. But from there, I wanted to just go play pro again and just focus on that. And so I did for a season. And about halfway through that season, I'm like, no, I need more. Like, I need to be doing something else. I was not the type that just wanted to only play basketball. So that's when I started getting the idea that, well, maybe I could just start my own business, because what I saw existed in America, to be honest, I didn't like it. I disagreed with the way that they approached it. And it was still so early. This was like before COVID and stuff, that it was really the way it was structured was it was clinical psychology with a sport focus. So it wasn't around performance or that type of thing. It was very clinical, or kind of more rigid. And so
Mhm.
I was like, there's nothing I see in America that I want to be a part of. So that's why I started my own. And from there, I had connections through my agent, different trainers and stuff that I had worked with. And then it was all by word of mouth at the beginning. And I was just doing it part time because I was still playing. And that was really great for a while, and then it started to grow, and then it became more difficult. So like, I was playing in Australia, and that's like a day and a half ahead, and so I'm trying to wake up super early for sessions, and then I'd like have practice and all of that. And then I had really late sessions. So it was cutting into my sleep. And I really had to make a decision. I had already played for 7, 8 years overseas, so I was already feeling like I was nearing the end. I had little injuries I was dealing with as well, and so that's when I had decided that I'll retire, really focus on sports psychology and growing that. So I retired from playing about now almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years. But I've had my business for 6 years, and so I've just been doing that full time since.
Oh, I give you so much credit for doing all of it. I'm sure you impacted so many so positively. And I also agree, connections are everything. All of the sports world is so small. Once you start making those connections, you can just see how many people are positively impacted by you. And I agree, we are farther behind talking about that. Pretty much every single person has gone through it one way or another. They just don't recognize what it means or what it is always and how to handle it. Before we go to your AG performance work, I do want to pivot back to the Commonwealth Games. So, what is the, the difference about preparing athletes for a once in a lifetime event like that, for example, or larger events versus maybe regular season competition?
Well, I think the biggest thing was maybe less about the fact that this was such a huge moment for them,
Mhm.
but the fact that they were kind of a new partnership. And with beach volleyball, there's so much of a team dynamic that is so unlike any other sport because during that the coaches can't be down with you. It's just
Mhm.
between you two. You're having to problem solve in between points and then during timeouts. So a huge piece of it was kind of aligning their personalities and figuring out communication, especially in high pressure moments. And I guess that's where the big moment comes in is that this was the highest pressure they could possibly face. And so, how do they keep their communication clear and level and their own emotions? How do they keep their own emotions clear and level and like working for them? It doesn't mean they shouldn't have emotion, but like, how do they use that emotion to help them? In terms of like the high pressure, both of them played professionally indoor and beach for a very long time. So they had a lot of experience with that. But pressure was definitely a big piece of it, and a lot of it was just talking through it very openly all together and individually because so much of what diffuses the intensity of an emotion is truly just owning it and talking about it and kind of looking at it in its face. It's like looking at the monster under the bed rather than just like assuming it's there and trying to
Mhm.
avoid it. So we really were moving away from avoidance and focusing on really tackling those emotions. And then the other part was just normalizing the moment for them. And so it's so easy to make these moments huge and so scary and kind of out of proportion. And a big part of it was reminding them that okay, the environment changes, the location we're playing changes, the meaning might change, but what you're actually doing is no different. It's the same sand, net, serving, passing. It's the same thing you do over and over again for years and years and years. And so reminding them that the external environment can change, but who they are, that doesn't change. And things will go up and down. There's going to be emotion, but if they can have that type of belief system in who they are and know that that can stay consistent, results will take care of themselves and they can just focus on the things that they've repeated for years and years.
I agree. Consistency is always so critical to fall back on, especially in high performance or high competition situations. For some reason, especially growing up, I always had this idea of like adaptability, which we still need, but it's not the foundation of our core team values or beliefs. We're still there for the same goal every time we step onto a court. But at the end of the day, obviously you're going to make some changes as a coach for adaptability purposes, depending on your opponent, but your team dynamic and your individual self as an athlete should always have the same foundation to fall back on. And then we adapt together. It's really important to identify that consistency is what you need to fall back on when you do feel the higher pressure moments, especially championship games.
Definitely. And I think that with the adaptability
Mhm.
aspect of it, it's the trust in yourself that you will be able to adapt in those
Mhm.
moments. I think sometimes people will fall into the trap of my prep has to be perfect, everything has to be right in line. And if it's not, things are off. And trusting that, okay, the prep might be different. In these big tournaments, you might only have 10 minutes to warm up and it's weird and you have to transition from place to place. And it's trusting in yourself that you've built the foundation that even if the prep or something happens mid game, you have the skills to be able to make that change.
It makes me so happy that we have people like you to share their wisdom. I know we've talked about it a little bit with like mental health in general and mental performance, that it's kind of always had that stigma behind it. Why do you think that is? Why it's taken so long to change it?
Well, I think the culture in sports for so long has just been that kind of tough guy attitude
Yeah.
of you just kind of get through things, and toughness looks like just ignoring these like the negative emotions, and it's quote soft to pay attention to how you feel or how you're thinking, and you just get the job done. So I think that is the culture that has been embedded into it. And then I think that there's been a huge lack of understanding of really what it is, and understanding that it's not just like thoughts and feelings. This influences the way that your brain chemicals and hormones influence like everything. So, for example, if you have a lot of negative thoughts or fears or worries, and your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, if that's heightened, if it's heightened for too long or too much, it starts to literally interfere with your nervous system. And your nervous
Mhm.
system is your muscle memory. So, if your nervous system is altered, you're not automatically performing the way you normally would. So while it starts with thoughts and feelings and stuff like that, it literally influences your physical abilities. And I think that gap of understanding that existed before and still exists a little bit makes people stigmatize it as just like being this like soft thing of talking about your
Mhm.
feelings. There's nothing wrong with that either, but I think people don't understand the depth at which it can influence your performance.
Yeah, absolutely. The more tools we have and are given, the more successful we can be. And that's in and out of sports. Again, going back to the social media concept, our life is also so much different now than before. And there are more things that we have to work through. When an athlete comes to you for the first time, what is the most common misconception they have about mental performance coaching?
To be honest, by the time somebody's coming to me, they
They're on
usually
board.
don't yeah, they usually are a
Yeah.
bit more on board. Occasionally, it will be parents who want their kids to
Hmm.
do it, and that's where maybe I get into that a little bit more, but it's usually less about thinking it's or, like, having a stigma around it, but more about the fear of actually
Hmm.
talking about how they feel and what's going through their mind. Like, there are times where I'll like, for example, work with a professional male basketball player or something. And I can tell that the first time we talked, that was probably the first time in their entire career that they've ever spoken about some of the things that they're battling with internally. And they're used to just kind of putting on a facade of like, oh, I'm good, like everything's fine. And so I think it's more the fear around letting some of their kind of internal battles out onto the surface, especially with everything you've been saying about social media and just like having this view of what you should look like as a high level athlete, because there's so much in the spotlight, and also like the pressures of being a youth athlete, of feeling like when they're 11 years old they need to be on the path for D1 or something. Like there's so many things that they have in
Yeah.
their mind as they should be doing or have to accomplish, and so I think if they feel like they're not on that path, it's really hard to expose some of those thoughts and feelings.
I was talking to a Michigan State volleyball player yesterday, and we were just talking about recruiting in general and how cutthroat that can be, especially if you are young. You have this concept of where you expect yourself and the mental model you need to fit. And I think she was saying she was getting like contacted from recruiters in like eighth grade, which is great. It means that you're on the right track, but it's also pulling you from thinking of 5, 10 years down the road versus actually in the moment of what you should be focusing on as an eighth grader. The difference between an eighth grader and a junior in high school is so different. You do so much developing during that time, even gearing up to go to college. And then even after college, there's so many adjustments. It's always good to lead with compassion and patience as you work through those types of things versus boxing yourself into this mental model of what an athlete should look like or be like. And I think everybody's journeys and stories are beautiful for their own reasons, and not everybody's should be the same.
For sure. And I think as a result of that pressure early on is it moves you away from, let me just win, let me compete, let me do whatever it takes to
Mhm.
help my team win. And it moves you more towards, how am I playing? What were my stats like? And it becomes so much more of a self-oriented thing. And it
Mhm.
takes the true joy of the game away, of like the reason we're doing it is to compete and to like be out there and to connect as a team. And I think the more that this pressure is put on, the more it becomes individual, which everybody knows, if you're focused on how you're playing individually, you're probably not playing as well as you could be, until you get into that flow of the game. So I
Mhm.
think it has a lot of effects that people don't realize how much it is in affecting people's psychology.
I totally agree. I do have a couple scenarios that I just love to pick your brain on from a high level practical standpoint. So for volleyball and athletes all across the world about struggle with confidence, how do you start with helping an athlete build real confidence and not just always faking it till you make it? And then are there any situations though where you do have to still fake it till you make it?
The first thing I always, I guess, investigate is, how is the athlete talking to themselves?
Uh-huh.
And usually we'll go through a process where I'm basically like, tell me everything you're saying to yourself. And if you don't know what you're saying to yourself, tell me how you feel in these moments. And I go down and I write down everything that they're saying to themselves. And then we go through each of them and we break it down, rationalize it. Because a lot of what they find usually is a lot of the things they're telling themselves, they don't actually believe to be true. Like they're just saying it to beat themselves up, or because they're upset or frustrated or something like that. But then instead of just coming up with kind of this like fake positive self talk, we're trying to create self talk or things, phrases, or tools that actually connects to something that they believe. Because if your brain doesn't actually believe it, you'll reject it pretty much
Mhm.
automatically. And so we first try to understand, is there a deep down belief system that we need to pull up to the top? And then we're creating reminders or phrases that kind of align with truly what they believe and allow them to understand that I can be mad, I can be upset or frustrated, but that can't sound like beating myself up in my head, because that is a sure way to kill your confidence. And if
Mhm.
there isn't a deep down underlying belief system, we then have to kind of work to build the confidence from the ground up. And some of that is first identifying, what are my strengths? What am I good at? And it's pretty unbelievable that if you ask people, like, what are they good at? It's first really hard for people to say and identify it. And then if you ask them, when's the last time you thought about what you were good at? A lot of them say never. And you realize, well, how are you going to feel confident if you're never thinking about what you're bringing to the table, what you're actually good at? So we start with that. And then another piece of it is building confidence through action. We can't always just think our way to confidence. We need to have action to, because we build confidence by challenging ourselves and then showing ourselves that, okay, we can do this and take steps forward. So then if there's no confidence that exists, we're like, okay, what's the first very controllable first step that can challenge you a little bit, but at least show you that you're capable of it, to really start to build confidence through action.
I love that. That is so helpful. We can think things and we can start to train our brain, but you actually have to act on it so then you can be fully immersed in what you're training yourself to know about yourself from a confidence standpoint. And another thing that I was thinking of too is bouncing back from a bad play or a mistake, short-term memory, and especially in volleyball, you might serve into the net and then you're going to be serving again your next rotation. How do you help your athletes reset their brain fast after those in the moment mistakes?
I'd say there's two components to it. One
Mhm.
will create a reset technique or a routine. And that is different depending on the sport, because, like, if basketball, you're having to get back on defense versus volleyball, you have a
Mhm.
second reset between points. And usually that's a combination of some type of like breath or cue. It could be a physical cue, a mental cue, a self talk, but very simple kind of couple of steps, or even just a single step or a single self talk to actually have a reset, something like a tool. But then the other side of it is building up the belief system. So with anything that we do, it starts with our thoughts and beliefs. And so if you're believing all these terrible things about yourself, or that you're screwing up the game, your actions are going to confirm that. And so while tools are great and I use them all the time, we have to make sure that we're thinking about things the right way too. And so the basic idea is, you're too valuable to get stuck in the past. And if you're stuck in the past, you're basically just guaranteeing frustration in the future or failure in the future. And so it's basically building the belief system that bad things are going to happen. That's okay. Failure is okay, or mistakes are okay. What's important is what do you do next, because you're too valuable to get stuck in the past. And, that's a process that is through talking and working through things, but that the belief system in combination with a tool is usually the best way to reset.
I love that statement. You're too valuable to be stuck in the past. That's really beneficial for everybody listening. It's so true. I think our past doesn't define us. The previous mistake doesn't define you. You should feel like you have a fresh start over after each mistake. And I understand that some athletes might not feel that way, especially if they're more of a bench player than maybe on the court, and then they go in and they make a mistake and then they're pulled out. Do you have any advice to athletes, feeling that way and going through that where they don't feel like they're allowed to make a mistake, and kind of how they can navigate it when obviously their coach's decisions isn't in their control?
Yeah, it might sound counterintuitive, but the first step is coming to some level of acceptance with it. And what I mean by that is if you're spending your valuable minutes, it might be just a single minute, thinking about, are they going to take me out? What's like, am I going to mess up and they go out? You're in a fear-based mindset. And no one plays well in a fear-based mindset. You're holding yourself back. You're not aggressive. You're scared. And so the coming to acceptance is, okay, they might take me out. That's outside of my control. If I make a mistake, I probably will come out, and it is what it is. But with that acceptance, you can then say, but with that minute that I have, I want to make this minute the best minute that I can absolutely do, or show, or take some risks, or show who I am as a player. So I think that part of it is if you're so fixated on those things outside of your control, that will be your downfall. But if you can be like, all right, whether it's a minute or 20 minutes, I'm going to approach it with good attitude, with effort, being aggressive, or specific focuses, and try to execute as best as you can and control those things as much as you can. And trust that if you're taking care of your side of it, not with perfection, but with the controllables, you might not get those extra minutes today, but with repetition, maybe a week down the line, a month, a year, now you're out there killing it. And you need to have those reps and understand that it is a process, and that's okay that it might take some time.
That's such great advice. And that goes into my next question. What is something tangible athletes can do tonight, for example, on their own to maybe help their mental game?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is write down a confidence list or do a confidence journal where you're writing down, what am I good at? What are some good things that have happened? What am I proud of? Just kind of fill your mind with some good things. Our mind is biased to go negative. And so if we're not intentionally thinking about the good things, we will really never think about the good things unless we're getting a lot of external validation, which sometimes you'll get, but sometimes you won't. And so you want to make sure that you are building a belief system that's not reliant on anybody else. So I would start with that. I would come up with a couple of self-talk reminders or phrases, something that is either a confidence building or something that is, instructional for yourself. So like being kind of a coach in your own head, whether that's like hold your follow through, or strong platform, or something like that. So you can come up with a few phrases like that. And then I would set a couple of intentions. And so what I mean by intentions is this is different than goals. Goals is something aspirational. It's harder to achieve, outside of your control. Intentions is what can I control, and what is one thing that I want to focus on, or up to three, no more than three, but a few things that I want to be super intentional about. Maybe that's being aggressive to the basket if you're a basketball player, or maybe that is communicating super well if you're a hitter in volleyball. So it could be something, really anything that you can control. It could be attitude, effort, whatever. But the more that we can guide our minds, we want to think of our mind like follow the leader. Where our mind goes, our body will follow. So we want to make sure we're really intentional about pointing our mind in the right direction so our body will follow that.
That is so helpful. And I am trying to do that myself, looking at the positives. We can get so caught up in life in general or the negatives or being hard on ourselves, like you've been saying. It's just such a mental shift with how busy life is. Like things are so fast. We don't always take the time to focus on that. And sometimes we have to purposefully carve that out for ourselves in order to be successful in so many ways.
Definitely. I think the one like note for anybody listening is don't believe your minds.
Yeah,
Our mind is
so
think
true.
of our mind like a programmed device,
Yeah.
basically. Our brain is programmed to see the negative. It's programmed to protect us, so create signals like anxiety to keep us
Mhm.
from seeing harm. Our brain is wants us to be comfortable, so we'll be lazier, we'll do things that are easier. If you're finding that you're not happy with performance, or even if you're not an athlete with like how your day to day is going, how much are you letting your mind do whatever it wants? Because an untrained mind is like a puppy. It's going to go, it's going to do all types of crazy stuff. And sometimes it will be great, but other times it's pointing us in the wrong direction. So instead of just following our brain mindlessly, be super intentional with where do I want to go? What do I want to think about? What do I want to be intentional about? And the more you can do that, the more you program your brain to point yourself naturally or automatically in the right direction.
That is so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Coaches and parents, what can they do to support athletes' mental health and mental performance?
Yeah, a huge topic, such an important question. I think the first thing is really not well, for parents first, not tying their whole identity to their sport. You hear a lot of like parents will treat their kids so much differently after a good game versus a bad game. And then they start to believe that, well, my worth is really based on my performance. And that is
Mhm.
so much weight to put on a kid, letting the kid make their own decisions about what they want to do. My favorite, it's a quote. I don't know the exact quote, but basically, a parent isn't going to create a lot of passion for their kid, but they can kill it very, very easily. And so let the kid guide themselves of like, what do they want to invest in and focus on? And a parent can be a facilitator of that, but we don't want to force our kids into doing things because you're just going to kill their joy for it very, very quickly. Coaches being very communicative. I think the number one thing I hear from athletes is just like the kind of like having to guess how their coach is feeling, or when they do communicate, it's very either condescending or very harsh or yelling or something like that. And so the more like kids are smart, they know what's going on and they can handle some
Mhm.
harsh truth, but it needs to be communicated in a way that's respectful and open and allows them to ask questions. And you guys should all have the same goal to improve and have a successful team. So being super open with communication and hearing them out and asking, checking in on your players, making sure people are okay. I think those would be the main things.
That's really helpful. And I fully agree. And on the coach topic, if they see their athletes struggling from a mental performance side, do you have any advice on how they can create a psychologically safe environment for to start having these conversations and to open up their team to better communication?
For sure. I think first it's understanding, if you're the coach, how much knowledge do you actually have in it? Because if you do have knowledge, then maybe you can be in a place where you help guide them and help them. But sometimes coaches might think that they know and then
Mhm.
maybe don't give the best advice, and then it's creates a more challenging situation. But I think more importantly, it's just opening up a space where it's okay to struggle with confidence, but it's not okay to just like punish somebody for having confidence. And so a lot of times if a player will say like, "Oh, I'm struggling with their confidence," and now the coach doesn't trust them as much and then they limit playing time or something, now the player's thinking, "Well, I can't tell them if I'm struggling in any way because that's going to
Mhm.
influence the way that they're using me or how much they trust me or something." So coaches recognizing that you can struggle with confidence and still perform well, and creating an environment where you talk about it. And I would just explore things with curiosity rather than judgment. And so the
Mhm.
more you can be curious and ask questions and just try to understand, sometimes just talking about it is a solution in itself. But if you don't have the skills or the knowledge to navigate it, bring some resources in to help. Otherwise, just like being very open and check in on people.
And there are a lot of resources now more than ever. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it's something that all coaches should look into one way or another. Not that everybody has time to become a certified mental professional, but just even having the foundation or reaching out to a professional like yourself to get the backing really helps. One of the biggest mistakes coaches can make is when you go back to that toughen up mentality and not giving them that safe space for athletes mentally to work through what they're going through, whether it's stuff off the court, whether it's stuff on the court with their teammates, whatever it is, it can be really detrimental not only to the team dynamic and their success, but also to themselves as individuals. And I believe that most coaches are aware of how much they impact, but I think sometimes we also forget that as well. And it's like we are mentors. We are driving these programs and leading the athletes. These athletes are trusting their coaches to lead in the gym, out of the gym, having those values, showing up for their teams.
Definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the trickle down effect is huge. Whether it's from the parent or the coach, the team is really going to embody the vibe or the demeanor they get from the people in charge above them. And so that should be treated with care.
I fully agree. Well, Allison, thank you so much for being here and for all that you're doing. You're breaking the stigma, helping athletes from youth to Olympic levels. And this is the work that really changes all of the games across the board. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with the She Ace That community today.
Thank you so much for having me. And likewise, you're doing the same thing with getting these stories out there and connecting people. And I think that's huge as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining this week, and we will see you next Wednesday.